Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about 5 movies that I personally find to be a little overrated. So a couple years ago, I did a video called 5 Criterion movies that I didn't love. And this response I got was actually pretty good. So I figured, why not do a similar video with more contemporary movies that are much more well-known and famous, and just kind of see what the response is. And to clarify, overrated doesn't always necessarily mean bad. In fact, out of all the movies I'm going to be talking about, there's only one in particular that I really don't like. But outside of that, I can see why a lot of people love the rest of these movies. And, I feel like I don't often talk about movies that I'm super critical of, and this gives me an opportunity to do that. And similar to my last video, I'm going to be reading my Letterboxd reviews of these movies. So for anyone interested, I'll put a description below if you want to follow me on Letterboxd. It's okay for people to have different opinions. So if you see a movie that I talk about on here that you love, no need to get offended. You can comment about how you feel about the movie, what your opinions are about it. All I ask is that you don't be a dick. I personally don't understand why there are so many people who get so offended over like, oh, you don't like that movie? What are you, an idiot? Or like, why? That's not fun. Just don't be a dick. That's all that I ask in return. It's okay if we have difference in opinions, guys. Let's not get too heated over this. This is just movies after all. So with all that being said, let's get into the first film that I'm going to be talking about, which is the one film that I really don't like. This is a film that came out in 2022. It was nominated for several Oscars, including Best Picture. And I can safely say, out of all the Best Picture nominated movies I've ever seen, this one is the worst. I am talking about Elvis. Austin Butler's performance as Elvis Presley is quite literally the only saving grace in this whole godforsaken movie. Not even Butler's inspired performance could save this absolute shit show. Hell, not even Daniel Day-Lewis could have saved this turd. Elvis is the most vapid, obnoxious, superficial, headache-inducing films I've seen, and I don't even know how long. Elvis is so bad that it actually makes Bryan Singer's Bohemian Rhapsody look like a masterpiece. I despise this movie, and I knew that I would, which is why I put off watching it for so long. Baz Luhrmann is one of the very few filmmakers that I legitimately loathe. Both Romeo and Juliet and The Great Gatsby were 2 of the most cringe-inducing films I've ever seen. To say that Luhrmann's movies are all style and no substance would be the understatement of the century. I knew within 10 minutes of watching Elvis that Luhrmann had no genuine intentions of telling an authentic and mature story about Elvis Presley. Instead, he was more focused on making a 2.5-hour music video that has even less depth and heart than Elvis's entire Wikipedia page. Baz Luhrmann's directing style is so aggressively annoying that it feels like he's trying to cater this movie to an audience of ADHD-stricken toddlers. The editing in this film felt like it was done by cokeheads. Most shots in this movie lasted less than 5 seconds. This movie cannot sit still. On top of that, there's the classic Luhrmann trademark of adding shitty pop and rap music to all of his films, which never works and always feels out of place. This movie even went as far as taking Elvis's songs and remixing them with random modern pop artists. The most nauseating example of this was when they remixed Viva Las Vegas with Britney Spears' Toxic. I'm not kidding. This movie feels like a bad joke. All the authenticity that was desperately needed in order for the film to have any sort of emotional impact gets completely wiped out by Luhrmann's overly flashy visual bullshit. I felt nothing watching this movie, even in its most dramatic moments. There were numerous times when this movie went full-on Dewey Cox and didn't even see the irony. And don't get me started on Tom Hanks. Oh boy, what happened, Tom? This is easily the worst Tom Hanks has ever been in a movie, ever. I challenge anyone to find me another Tom Hanks movie where he sucked this hard. It was beyond embarrassing. Out of all the Best Picture nominated films I've seen in my lifetime, Elvis just might be the very worst. This is an awful movie in practically every regard. Yeah, I wrote this. When did I write this? I wrote this in February of last year, and clearly I was in a mood. But reading it now, I stand by everything I said. I think this movie's terrible. I hate Baz Luhrmann's directing style. Like I mentioned, I've seen Romeo and Juliet and The Great Gatsby. I'm like, God, I hate the way it looks. I hate the way the vibe of his movies. It's just not for me. And here's the thing. I'm actually an Elvis fan. And when I heard there was going to be an Elvis movie, I was like, that's a great idea, because, you know, there have been certain Elvis movies throughout the years, but there's never been like a really big mainstream, big budgeted Elvis movie that really digs into, you know, who he was as a person and the impact he made on pop culture as a whole. It's something that can't really be understated. And then there's that when it's like, and it's going to be directed by Baz Luhrmann. And I was like, oh, fuck. Why? Why him? And it pretty much confirmed that I was going to hate this movie from the get-go. I watched it going like, okay, maybe this is the movie where Luhrmann is going to tone back some of his more obnoxious styles of filmmaking, and maybe he's going to be a little bit more grounded, a little bit more mature, a little bit more authentic in terms of, you know, learning about Elvis and his career. But no, pretty much what I said about it looking like a 2.5-hour music video that has little to no depth whatsoever, I firmly stand by it. So yeah, sorry Elvis fans or Baz Luhrmann fans that may be watching. This movie sucks. On to the next one. So I've mentioned before that I'm a big James Bond fan. And what I love about the James Bond community is that nobody has like the same opinion on most films. It's really interesting how some people will hate certain James Bond films and other people will love the exact same one. I just find that really interesting. This would be considered a very hot take amongst most James Bond fans. The other movie that I personally consider to be quite overrated is The Spy Who Loved Me. I gotta be honest, I've never really understood why The Spy Who Loved Me gets routinely named as being one of the best Bond movies ever. Basically, this movie has three things going for it. You get a great opening action sequence, one of the most iconic Bond henchmen ever, and a badass car chase with one of my favorite Bond cars, the Lotus Esprit. Outside of that, The Spy Who Loved Me is about as standard as a Bond film can get. For one thing, the villain in The Spy Who Loved Me is easily one of the most boring and forgettable of the whole franchise. He has nothing to offer other than a generic take over the world kind of motivation. And then there's the entire third act of this film, which goes on for way too long and gets very monotonous to watch. But the most disappointing aspect of this movie is that the whole romantic subplot, of which the film is named after, is extremely underwhelming and poorly written. Agent XXX, played by Barbara Bach, who gives a rather dull and lifeless performance, is set up to be the female equivalent of James Bond. That's a great premise for a Bond movie, especially for this era. But here's the problem. At no point in the film does she ever get a chance to shine and show off her great spy skills. The closest we ever get to seeing her skills as a highly trained agent is when she pulls a gun out on Jaws, who then incapacitates her immediately, and then Bond rescues her. Her character gets reduced to being just another damsel in distress, which we see later on in the film again, where she gets kidnapped and held hostage until the end of the movie. Agent XXX is useless in this film, which is such a shame. There was a great opportunity to make her character an awesome female spy, but the movie does absolutely nothing to showcase that. Outside of that, the chemistry between her and Bond is non-existent. The film is called The Spy Who Loved Me, and at no point does that ever feel like the case. Bond treats her just like every other side piece he's ever encountered. Yet the film tries to make such a big deal about her character, but at the end of the day, she's just a plot device, nothing more. When it comes to Roger Moore's Bond films, I tend to rate them on their entertainment value rather than their overall quality because, in my opinion, Moore's Bond movies aren't the best quality in comparison to the rest of the series. Honestly, I prefer Moonraker to this film simply because I find that movie to be more entertaining because of how ridiculous it gets. This film is very dull in comparison to Moonraker, which, by the way, has a better and more capable female agent than XXX, the hilariously named CIA agent Holly Goodhead. Oh god. The Spy Who Loved Me is an overrated Bond movie in my opinion. I think it's fun in some moments, boring and generic in others, and I just can't get over how mishandled the character of Agent XXX was. I would have loved to have seen a genuinely strong female spy for Bond to team up with, but I guess we wouldn't see that until Michelle Yeoh starred along Brosnan in Tomorrow Never Dies. She was everything that Agent XXX should have been, and more. Yeah, here's the thing. I know that The Spy Who Loved Me is one of the more important Bond movies, just in terms of influence alone. And it has one of the most iconic openings ever where Bond, skis off the cliff and he gets out his parachute and it's the British flag. And I love moments like that. But like I said, everything else is very average. There's nothing about The Spy Who Loved Me that goes above the average feeling of it. And what makes it even more disappointing is that the movie's called The Spy Who Loved Me, and Agent XXX is just another generic Bond girl. She's not great. And nothing against Barbara Bach. She seems like she's beautiful. She's a beautiful woman. She's just is not a very good actress, at least not in this movie. I can't think of really any other movies I've seen her in. And her character has, like I said, there's no moment in this movie where she gets to be a badass. Like I say, Michelle Yeoh as a counter argument to that, where in Tomorrow Never Dies, she is kicking ass. She could kick James Bond's ass. I loved it. I thought that was a great, we don't see that often. And yeah, this, it's okay. The movie is, it's kind of dull in my opinion. I like Moonraker better. And there are Bond fans screaming at their monitor right now, how can you like Moonraker? That movie's ridiculous. That's why I like it. Roger Moore is not my favorite Bond, okay? I've always said Roger Moore is to James Bond what Adam West was to Batman, okay? Whenever I'm in the mood for a fun, campy, maybe somewhat kind of dumb Bond movie, Roger Moore is my go-to. And the movies that I love of his are the ones that get the most absurd, like Moonraker. That's just my opinion. But yeah, hopefully there aren't too many Bond fans in the comments that are going to try to rake me over the coals with this one. It's an okay movie, not great. Okay, the next film is a film that I do like, but I just don't like the reputation it's garnered as being one of the greatest action movies of all time. I don't think it's earned that reputation. I think its sequel is even better. And the movie I'm referring to is a film called The Raid. I watch a lot of action movies, especially martial art action movies. The Raid is a solid movie, but it's not the greatest action movie ever made. Not by a long shot. I'll be honest, The Raid's reputation rather annoys me. I have this gut feeling that the many people who praise this movie as the greatest action film ever made have not seen many Hong Kong action movies that are quite frankly much better than this one. In terms of martial arts choreography, The Raid is great. It's not the best I've ever seen, but for someone who may not be that familiar with the martial arts genre, I could certainly see why someone may see this film as one of the greatest. Reputation aside, one of the other aspects that bothers me about The Raid is the cinematography, particularly that of the shaky cam. I'm not against the idea of a shaky cam, just as long as it's used sparingly, but The Raid uses it constantly. So much so that the movie can begin to get rather headache-inducing very quickly. Outside of that, the plot is generic and the characters are underdeveloped. Do you know why Die Hard is so highly regarded by action fans? It's because people like John McClane. They care about him. They see him as a vulnerable New York City cop and not just some indestructible action machine. He has depth. You can't say that about any of the characters in The Raid. The Raid is a good action movie, but it's not great. And it's certainly not the greatest one ever made. Raid 2 is a massive step up from this film, in my opinion. Everything I complain about in this movie is corrected in that one. Yeah, The Raid 2, now that is a movie that is definitely in the conversation of one of the greatest modern action movies. There's a story that is really complex. We get to know the protagonist a little bit better. There's more layers to his character, and the action is even more insane. The Raid is okay. It's an okay action movie. If you've ever seen films like A Drunken Master 2, in my opinion, Jackie Chan's Drunken Master 2 is the greatest martial arts film in terms of fighting choreography alone. That choreography in that movie blows my mind. Does The Raid come close to that? No, quite frankly, it doesn't. Other martial art movies I'd put above The Raid in terms of martial arts action are movies like the first Ip Man, I think is incredible. That's another movie where the action is not only amazing, but the story is meaningful and you care deeply about the character, and Donnie Yen gives an amazing performance. So that's just another example. I like this movie. I've watched it several times because I like watching this one and The Raid 2 back to back, but every time I do so, I'm like, man, The Raid 2 is so much better. I mean, The Raid 2 is also brutal. It's one of the most brutal action movies I've ever seen, so it's not for everybody, but it is a massive step up from the first Raid, which I think is good. I think it's good. Don't think this is a bad movie at all. I just don't think it's the greatest ever made. Well, if you've seen the thumbnail to this video, which if you clicked on it, how could you miss it? Then you're going to know what this next movie is. And fun little fact, as of right now, this is my most liked and viewed Letterboxd review that I've done ever. So without further ado, here's my review of Everything Everywhere All at Once. Everything Everywhere All at Once left me feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and underwhelmed. There's a lot to admire about this film. Its premise is original, the direction is very well done, as is the editing, and the entire cast is genuinely great. When this film started, I thought I was going to love it, but as the movie went on, I started to like it less and less. This movie feels like an art house film made for the TikTok generation, aka people with short attention spans. It's very random, overly chaotic, and absurdly fast-paced. I can't help but feel that Everything Everywhere All at Once really buckles under the weight of its own creativity. It's a film that's trying to be a lot of different things. It wants to be an art film, a sci-fi film, a kung fu film, a comedy/absurdist film, and a family drama. I admire the ambition, but it really began to feel like way too much after a while. The pacing is so breakneck that I literally began to get a headache, and it was hard for me to get emotionally attached to anything in this story because the movie was just throwing so much shit at me constantly. It felt like the directors were trying way too hard just to show off. I understood what this movie was trying to convey thematically. It's clearly a commentary on fighting optimism in a nihilistic world, or in this case, worlds. I get it. But whatever genuine emotion this movie was trying to have, it all gets immediately undermined by nonstop visual gags, some of which were needlessly juvenile and all of which felt weird just for the sake of being weird. I think a great film to watch as a juxtaposition of this one is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. That's a great example of a weird and highly original movie that doesn't have its depth or emotional weight undermined due to its staggering creativity. I wanted to love this movie, really I did, and I understand why so many people do love it. It is different, there's no denying that, and who knows, perhaps during a rewatch I might feel differently, but as of right now, Everything Everywhere All at Once feels like an overhyped film that is far too chaotic for its own good. Yeah, I've only seen this movie once, and I wrote that review back in December of 2022, and I still stand by everything that I say in that review. It was a headache to watch. Like, the movie felt like it was assaulting me with visuals. And I get it. It's not like the movie didn't warn you. I mean, the title's called Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's meant to be overbearing. But even when I looked deeper into what the movie was trying to say, I don't know. It's just, it didn't really blow me away like everybody else did. And, you know, there were some people that I also posted this on Reddit, on Unpopular Opinions, and it got a lot of attention there. And there were several comments that's like, this movie doesn't really do anything all that different than like what your average Rick and Morty episode does. And I was like, holy shit, they're actually kind of right. I love Michelle Yeoh. I mentioned her in my James Bond review earlier in this video. I think she's a terrific actress, and she is great in this movie. Everybody's great in this movie. Ke Huy Quan, him winning the was a joy to watch because I missed Short Round. He's such a lovely person, and I hope he gets even more awesome movies in the future. Hopefully one that I enjoy more than this one, because it's nowhere near as deep as it thinks it is, and it feels like the movie was more focused on its visuals rather than its storytelling. Because it was so overstimulating to me, it was hard for me to even care what was going on. I didn't like the style of it. I didn't really care for the story or the characters all that much, and I was getting really annoyed by the non-stop, like, dildo jokes in this movie. Like, people shoving stuff up their ass is a common thing that happens throughout this movie, and I'm like, is that supposed to be funny? Or, because it, like, and tonally this film is all over the place, and none of it meshed with me. Like, none of it. Yeah, I didn't really like this one. Okay. So I have a complicated relationship with this next movie in that I do love it. I actually love this movie. It's a big part of my childhood, and I still enjoy it to this day. But I'm not going to lie. As I've gotten older, I see the cracks of the movie every time I revisit it. I see more flaws, and quite frankly, it just doesn't live up to the other movies in this franchise. Now, before people, lose their minds, I'll just get it out of the way. I am talking about Return of the Jedi. I love this movie. I do. It was my favorite Star Wars movie growing up. As I've gotten older, it's not. And I'm not going to pretend like this is like a radical opinion. There's actually been a lot of videos on YouTube talking about why the Return of the Jedi is not like the greatest Star Wars movie and why there's a lot of flaws with it. So this is one of my longer reviews on Letterboxd. I'll get through it as quick as I can. That really just points out all the flaws that I've noticed over the years, even though I still really enjoy the movie. But to the Star Wars fans out there who think that this movie is like untouchable, it's not. I mean, every movie can be criticized, so don't get too upset. But I do think The Return of the Jedi is a little overrated and overprotected amongst certain fans. But I'll just get into the review. I'm well aware of the staunch Return of the Jedi defenders out there. Some of them go as far as to say that Return is the best Star Wars film, which I heavily disagree with. I'm also aware of the many detractors of Return, who I think go too hard on the film and say that it's genuinely bad, which I also disagree with. The truth of the matter is, Return of the Jedi is far from perfect, but it's also too fun and visually very well made to be a fully bad movie. Return of the Jedi is good, really good in some parts, and fairly underwhelming and anticlimactic in other parts. Let's start with the good stuff. The opening at Jabba's palace is terrific. The aerial battles at Death Star 2 are the best of the entire trilogy, and the finale confrontation between Luke and Vader is amazing. Easily the highlight of the whole film. Luke, in general, is such a badass in this, so much so that he essentially carries the whole movie for me. Also, the addition of Emperor Palpatine is fantastic. He's such a great villain. Unfortunately, it's everything else that's kind of lackluster. The entire second act drags significantly. Our three core characters do a lot of meandering on Endor, which doesn't add much to the overall story, except to establish the Ewoks and the shield generator for the Death Star 2. It feels like the movie is padding out the runtime during the entire second act, which negatively affects the film's pace. The Ewoks in general aren't my favorite either. I don't hate them, but I also can't pretend that it doesn't annoy the shit out of me whenever I see them use little rocks to knock out fully armed stormtroopers who have helmets on. Give me a break. Also, their song at the end of this movie sucks. No one can convince me otherwise. This may be a somewhat controversial take, but I found Yoda's death to be rather forced and anticlimactic. It's incredibly rushed. It seems like the movie only killed him off to create a moment of forced sentimentality after he confirms that Vader is Luke's true father. Now we gotta talk about one of the bigger issues. Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford is very clearly phoning in his performance as Han Solo. He comes off as being disinterested and rather goofy in most of Return, which bums me out because he was so awesome in A New Hope and Empire. It's no secret that Ford had developed a certain disdain for these movies at this point and just wanted to get out while he still could, and sadly, that shows in his performance. In Empire Strikes Back, Yoda says there is another, alluding to the possibility that Leia is strong with the Force. This is later confirmed when Luke uses the Force to contact Leia after his defeat with Vader. So Empire clearly set up Leia to have a major part in the finale of the trilogy, but for some dumb reason, she gets reduced to being a side character along with Han on Endor. It would have been so cool to see Leia have a badass character arc regarding her abilities with the Force and aiding Luke when it came to facing off with Vader and Emperor Palpatine, or just have her play a more integral part in the story and not make her run around on Endor with a bunch of fucking teddy bears. I'm not gonna lie and say that it doesn't feel like Return of the Jedi missed some major story opportunities, because it does. Leia should have been more essential, and Han should have been the one flying the Millennium Falcon and destroying Death Star 2, not Lando. I don't care if he was the original owner of the ship. It wasn't satisfying seeing Lando being such a crucial aspect in this movie because, let's face it, Lando is a side character, not a main one. Lando should have been on Endor so that Chewie and Han could have their time to shine in the single most important space battle in this trilogy. I can't be the only one who feels this way. Overall, I still enjoy Return of the Jedi despite my many flaws with it. Do I wish it was a better movie? Yes, but I'm also glad it isn't a complete shit show like the prequels are. So I'm fine with Return of the Jedi being pretty good and not totally awful. I don't know, in my opinion, obviously because I wrote this review, I make some pretty good points there. I mean, to the Return of the Jedi lovers out there who love this movie more than any of the other Star Wars movies, I would like to have a cordial debate with you guys. And what do you think of the points I brought up? Do you think they're valid? Do you think they're nitpicky bullshit? I mean, you know, regardless, I would genuinely like to hear your thoughts on my critiques of this film. The Return of the Jedi holds such a special place in my heart because it was my favorite as a kid. But man, as I've gotten older, it's clearly Empire Strikes Back. That's the best one. I know that's like the most obvious take on the Star Wars trilogy. And by the way, for the record, the Star Wars trilogy is literally the only Star Wars movies that I care about. I like I said, I really do like Return of the Jedi a lot. Part of me really loves it, but I can't just ignore the flaws in it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Return of the Jedi. Please don't hate me. All right, guys, so that's my video on 5 overrated movies. What are your thoughts on my picks? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why? And what are some movies that you find to be overrated? Please put your list down below and let's get a fun conversation going. And as always, thank you for watching.